On this day in 44 BC in Rome, Senators Casca, Cicero, and Cassius decided the night before the assassination of Julius Caesar that Marc Antonius, commonly known as Marc Antony, would not be killed. About 60 Roman senators who called themselves liberators had begun to fear Caesar's growing power after being appointed dictator for life. Antony had remained faithful to Caesar, even though there had been conflicts between them. He had already rejected joining the conspiracy when Trebonius had suggested it the previous year. The next day, the Ides of March, Marc Antony would go down to warn the dictator. He would be too late. On this day in 1489, in Cyprus, Catherine Canaro, Queen of Cyprus, was forced to abdicate and sell her kingdom to the Republic of Venice. Catherine, a Venetian, had married James II of Cyprus, also known as James the Bastard. They had married by proxy in July 1468 in Venice. She was 14 years old. In 1472, she traveled to Cyprus and they were married in person. James died a few months later amidst suspicion he might have been poisoned by agents of Venice. Catherine then became regent of Venice, and during her reign, the island was controlled by Venetian merchants. After her abdication, Cyprus became a colony of the Republic of Venice until it was captured by the Ottomans in 1571. On this day in 1757, in England, Admiral Sir John Byng was executed by firing squad aboard HMS Monarch for failing to do his utmost to prevent Minorca falling to the French following the Battle of Minorca. The Battle of Minorca was a naval battle between French and British fleets and was the opening sea battle of the 7 Years' War. Admiral Byng had commanded the British fleet sent to relieve the Mediterranean island of Minorca. He allowed the island to fall to the French, and the incensed British public demanded an investigation. He was arrested and tried by court-martial for having breached the Articles of War. Although he was acquitted of cowardice, he was found guilty of failing to do his utmost, which carried a mandatory death sentence. On this day in 1794, in the United States, Eli Whitney received a patent for his invention, the cotton gin, that revolutionized America's cotton industry. Prior to Whitney's cotton gin model, cotton had required considerable labor to clean and separate the fibers from the seeds. Whitney's device was capable of cleaning 50 pounds, or 23 kilograms of lint per day. Cotton became a tremendously profitable business, creating many fortunes in the south of the United States. On this day in 1879, in Germany, future physicist Albert Einstein was born at Ulm, in the Kingdom of Württemberg, to Hermann Einstein, a salesman and engineer, and his wife Pauline. Einstein would become a theoretical physicist who developed the general theory of relativity, one of the two pillars of modern physics. He is best known for his mass-energy equivalence formula, E equals mc squared, dubbed the world's most famous equation. He received the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics for his discovery of the law of the photoelectric effect, which was pivotal in establishing quantum theory. On this day in 1883, German political philosopher Karl Marx died in London, England, at the age of 64, of complications from bronchitis and pleurisy. He would die a stateless person with 11 mourners at his funeral in Highgate, London. Marx is best known for the 1848 publication, The Communist Manifesto, written with co-author Friedrich Engels. The book featured their theories on society and politics, and how the capitalist society would be replaced by socialism, and then eventually by communism. On this day in 1915, during World War I, British cruisers HMS Kent and HMS Glasgow cornered the German light cruiser Dresden in the neutral territory of Cumberland Bay on the Chilean island of Masa Tierra, known today as Robinson Crusoe Island. 1 month earlier, Dresden had been the only German cruiser to escape destruction at the Battle of the Falkland Islands. After rounding Cape Horn, Dresden put into Cumberland Bay with very little supplies remaining. HMS Glasgow had intercepted signals from Dresden, calling for resupplying, and found the cruiser still at anchor. The Dresden ran up a white flag to buy time for the crew to abandon ship and scuttle her. The ship sank with her war ensign flying. The 300 crew were interned in Chile for the duration of the war. On this day in 1939, in Czechoslovakia, the Republic was dissolved, opening the way for Nazi occupation of Czech areas and the separation of Slovakia. The day before, Adolf Hitler had invited Joseph Tiso, the ex-prime minister deposed by Czechoslovak troops days earlier, to Berlin, and urged him to proclaim Slovakia's independence. Hitler had falsely claimed that Hungarian troops were approaching Slovak borders. He threatened to withhold support if Tiso did not consent. On the 14th, the Slovak parliament convened, and any debate against independence was squashed by a report that any delay would result in Slovakia being divided between Hungary and Germany. Independence was declared, and Joseph Tiso appointed the first prime minister. His first task was to send a telegram requesting state protection from the Germans. The telegram had actually been composed the previous day in Berlin. The request was readily accepted. On this day in 1943, during World War II, the final liquidation of the Krakow Ghetto in Poland was carried out under the commander of SS Untersturmführer Almog, his rank being the equivalent of a second lieutenant. 8,000 Jews deemed able to work were transported to the Plaszow labor camp. Some 2,000 unable to work were killed in the ghetto streets. The remaining was sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp. The ghetto was established in March 1941, with 15,000 Jews crammed into an area previously inhabited by 3,000. It was separated from the rest of the city by high walls with guarded entrances. One apartment would be allocated for 4 families, with the less fortunate living on the street. Movie director Roman Polanski was a notable survivor of the ghetto as a child. On this day in 1964, a jury in Dallas, Texas found nightclub operator Jack Ruby guilty of murdering Lee Harvey Oswald and sentenced him to death. Oswald was the man accused of assassinating President John F. Kennedy. On the 24th of November 1963, Ruby, also known as Sparky, had made his way to the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters, where authorities were preparing to transfer Oswald to the nearby county jail. Ruby stepped out from a crowd of reporters and fatally shot Oswald with a .38 revolver. The shooting was broadcast live on national television. In January 1967, while arrangements were underway for a new trial, Ruby would die from cancer at Parkland Hospital, where Oswald had died, and President Kennedy had been pronounced dead after his assassination. On this day in 1967, President John F. Kennedy's body was moved from a temporary grave to a permanent memorial site lit with an eternal flame at Arlington National Cemetery. He was previously buried in a small 20 by 30 plot in Arlington on 25th of November 1963. An estimated 16 million people had visited his grave. Kennedy and William Howard Taft are the only 2 U.S. presidents buried in Arlington. On this day in 1984, in Northern Ireland, Gerry Adams, the head of the Irish Republican political party Sinn Fein, was seriously wounded by Ulster freedom fighters in an assassination attempt in Belfast. He was hit in the neck, shoulder, and arm when gunmen fired about 20 shots into the car in which he was traveling. He was rushed to the Royal Victoria Hospital, where he underwent surgery to remove the bullets. Police seized 3 suspects who were later convicted and sentenced. Adams would claim that the British Army had prior knowledge of the attack and allowed it to go ahead. On this day in 1990, in the USSR, a secret ballot was held by the Soviet Congress of People's Deputies that elected Mikhail Gorbachev to a new 5-year term as president. The final vote was extremely close and barely achieved his 2/3 majority. Gorbachev won the presidency, but by 1991 his critics would be pillaring him for the nation's dismal economic and faltering control over the Soviet Empire. In December 1991, he would resign the presidency and the Soviet Union would dissolve.